For several months, my therapist had been suggesting we try EMDR. I kept resisting. If you're unfamiliar, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a type of therapy often used for trauma. In simple terms, it helps your brain refile painful memories so they don't keep setting off the same intense emotional alarms. Instead of having to talk through every detail, you focus on the memory while doing something that alternates stimulation between the left and right sides of your body, like following a moving light with your eyes, or, in my case, holding two small pulsators, one in each hand, and they buzz back and forth. They were hooked up to my therapist's phone so she could have control over the timing and intensity. I had been reluctant for months, as I said, maybe because I felt like my trauma wasn't enough to qualify. EMDR is for big, life-shattering events, right? For example, my dad did EMDR for the trauma of doing CPR on his own son, my brother, after the farming accident. That's indescribable. My stuff doesn't even feel like it belongs in the same category. That was probably the main reason I can identify, the one my logical mind could admit out loud, but there might have been other layers. Maybe I didn't believe it could work. Maybe I was afraid to hope in something and be disappointed. Maybe I just didn't want to dig into things that were already exhausting to think about. I can't fully put my finger on it. My therapist had said something to me back when I was agonizing over whether to end the marriage that stuck with me. I have a feeling, she told me, that if you do EMDR, it will no longer feel like an uncertainty. You'll know exactly what you need to do. Finally, I agreed to it, and for a few weeks beforehand, we did the prep work. Before you even touch the painful memories in EMDR, there's a sort of mental warm-up phase. You learn grounding tools so that if the emotions get too intense, you can pull yourself back to calm. My therapist had me visualize a safe place in detail, what it looked like, what it smelled like, the sounds I'd hear there. A mental retreat that I could run to if the session started to feel overwhelming. We practiced this while I held the pulsators, letting the buzz alternate from hand to hand, almost like the rhythm was helping me walk around inside that safe space. That prep is important because EMDR isn't about reliving trauma without a net. It's about revisiting it while you feel anchored and supported. We'd also done some pre-work to figure out exactly where we were going to start. In EMDR, that means identifying a negative cognition. So a core belief that you hold about yourself, something like, I'm unlovable, or I'm not safe. Mine was, I don't belong, with a side order of, something is wrong with me. From there, my therapist had me rate how true that belief felt for me in the present moment, and then we did what's called a float back. Basically, she had me scan my life for the earliest or most emotionally charged memory where I felt that same way. Once I found it, we locked in that memory as our target, the one that we would work on in the very first EMDR session. My I don't belong belief was rooted in the deep confusion I felt about where I grew up. Not just the rural isolation of Northwest Iowa, but the way it was steeped in such a conservative culture. There was never a moment in my life that I felt like I truly belonged to that world, that it was meant for me or that I was meant for it. There's something about that kind of disconnection from your origins that can feel like a moral failing, like you're broken for not loving the place and the culture that raised you. In reality, it's not a flaw in you. It's a mismatch between your authentic self and the environment you were placed in. Still, I felt that I had absorbed the message that normal people surely must feel connected to where and how they grew up. That this sense of belonging is supposed to be a core part of who you are, shaping the next chapters of your life. Since I didn't have that, I decided something was wrong with me. I must be selfish, defective, a bad seed. I didn't belong to where I was from, not to the land, not to the church I was required to attend. I didn't even feel like I fully belonged to my own family. I couldn't be myself there. I spent so much of my life suppressing the person I truly felt like I was, the person I wanted to be, the words I wanted to say, the things I wanted to do. And every time I hid my real self to survive in that environment, it reinforced the story: the real me doesn't belong here. And the thing about beliefs like this is they don't stay neatly packed in the box of your childhood. You might want them to. I certainly did. I remember literally thinking upon graduating high school that I was about to get a new, fresh start at life in college, that everything would be different. But again, those negative beliefs don't stay behind with your childhood self. They seep into every friendship, every relationship, every job, every room you walk into as you enter adulthood. I don't belong became the lens that I looked through even as an adult. It dictated how much space I allowed myself to take up, how quickly I'd shrink back if I felt misunderstood, and how easily I would accept less than I deserved, because deep down I thought I was lucky to be let in at all. That's why EMDR mattered, because it's not just about revisiting a single painful memory. It's about tracing the thread all the way back to the first knot and loosening it. It's about finally challenging the belief that shaped the way I saw myself for decades. We landed on the memory during a float back, but I already knew where we would end up. It's something that's been with me for a very long time. It was after a family trip to Minneapolis. I think I was maybe 6 or 7. I don't even remember what we were there for, but I do remember how alive I felt. The city buzzed around me like it had been waiting for me all this time. People were everywhere, cars and buses rushing by, sidewalks, store windows, stoplights, for goodness sakes. The town I grew up in, where my family still lives, doesn't have a single one. Last I knew, it does have a flashing one at a 4-way stop, but no stoplights. Police sirens. My rural kid ears, extremely rarely had heard one. Wailing like a song. It felt normal. I didn't even care that we looked out of place. My mom in her long skirts and lace head covering, the doily of our church's rules pinned neatly on top of her hair. None of that mattered, because for once I was somewhere I wanted to be, somewhere I could imagine staying. And then we went home, back to the middle of nowhere, Northwest, rural, farmland, Iowa, a town of less than 1,000, 8 minutes away from my farm. Back to the church that I hated, back to the life that never felt like it fit. And that first night home, my parents immediately had to rush off to some sort of church event, leaving my siblings and I in the dark house. It was night. We had electricity, but it was nighttime. And I remember sobbing. I remember where I was in the house. I remember being covered with a blanket. The grief was physical. It pressed down on my chest like something stealing the air from the room. I wanted to live in the city, to be part of that moving, breathing world, and instead, here I was, stranded again. I pulled a framed family picture into my arms, rocking with it, as if it could anchor me to what mattered. But terrifyingly, it didn't work. I didn't feel soothed. If anything, the frame felt heavy in my hands, like proof of how wrong I was for this life. What kind of person can't feel better holding their own family close? I'm a bad seed. Something's wrong with me. I don't belong here. I look around. I notice that my siblings don't feel this way. Even more confirmation. Something is wrong with me. That's the moment my therapist locked onto. She asked where I felt it in my body. In my stomach, I told her. And it was there, hard, knotted, like a rock pressing from the inside. I had to double over at one point. On a scale from 1 to 10, how strong is that feeling, she asked. I remember high, very high. I don't remember the number I told her. And that's where we began. She told me to hold the thought, that grief, that negative cognition of I don't belong. And then the buzzers started pulsating in my hands. 10, 15, 20 seconds later, I can't remember, they stopped. And she asked, what do you notice now? I told her, again, physically, vice grip, in my abdomen, doubling me over. Mentally, it was the same anguish still. I hate living here. I hate being from here. But that must make me a bad person because you're supposed to love where you're from. Go with that, she softly said, and the buzzers started again. And that's how EMDR works. There's little loops of feel, notice, feel again, and each loop is called a set. You go in, you come up for air, you notice what's shifted or what hasn't, and you go back under, and we kept going. At one point, the pain in my abdomen got so intense that I thought we might have to stop, but then, almost like a tight knot finally loosening, it started to let go. She asked, "Is that the earliest you can remember feeling this way?" Turns out it wasn't. We floated back even further. Suddenly, I was in the Sunday school hall of my childhood church, sitting on the very front bench, which means I must have been in the preschool section. My legs were too short to touch the floor, swinging a little, like children's legs do. The memory was brief, but so clear. I don't belong here. Was I switched at birth? Maybe someday they'll find out. And like those stories that I've seen on the news, I'll finally get to go back to where I'm really from. The strange thing about memories that early is how they don't feel like thinking to me. It more felt like knowing. Like the belief was already sitting there before I had words for it. And that's the thing about a core belief like I don't belong. It doesn't start as a conscious thought that you can argue with or that you can even verbalize. It just is a feeling that quietly moves in, rearranges your brain, and stays. By the time you're old enough to notice it, it's already been your constant companion for years, thus feeling normal. Sitting there on that little bench, legs swinging, I couldn't have told you why I felt different. I just knew I wasn't of this place. That somehow everyone else had gotten a rule book for how to belong, and I didn't. And EMDR has this way of pulling on the thread until you see where it begins. For me, I think it did begin there in the front row of Sunday school, long before I understood what core beliefs even were. From that preschool bench, the thread of I don't belong tugged me forward in time and landed me in another chair entirely, in a psychiatrist's office. I was in, I think, junior high, old enough to know this wasn't normal, but too young to understand the power dynamics at play. A family member had brought me because I can only guess that maybe my obedience wasn't up to standard, maybe I wasn't easy enough to control. I do know that I was a very good student. I do know that I wasn't getting in trouble at school, so those are my only guesses for why I had been brought in. Or maybe I seemed flat, lacking affect, or deeply depressed. But here's what I know now, that, for example, sometimes depression, lacking affect, isn't proof that something is wrong with you. Sometimes those are signals, a sign that your environment is wrong for you. In that sense, it wasn't a weakness. It wasn't a disease to be numbed at all costs. It didn't mean something was fundamentally wrong with me. It was the fierce little alarm bell of my soul saying, you don't belong here. This place is breaking you. Pay attention. The tragedy is that instead of honoring that signal, the system pathologized it. I was told the problem was inside me, not around me, and yet I can see now that my younger self was right. That sadness was integrity. My despondence, wisdom. It was my soul refusing to adapt to a place it did not belong. And that day, in what now feels like either medical malpractice or a carefully orchestrated story fed by my family member, that day I walked out with a label, bipolar type 2, and a prescription for Depakote and lithium. Not even FDA labeled at that point for children. I don't remember taking those meds for very long. long enough to know I didn't feel well on them, long enough to feel dead inside, for something deep inside me to scream no. During EMDR, we eventually circled back to these moments. And here's the thing, I don't even know if what I did next was how you're supposed to do it, but it felt right. In one of those processing loops, I brought my now self, me right now, after years of therapy, perspective. I imagined walking up to the little girl in that first memory, the one sobbing in her rural Iowa house after Minneapolis, aching for a life that felt normal. And I crouched down to meet her eyes. Hold tight to that feeling, I told her. I know it's heavy, I know it feels like it's eating you alive, but remain steadfast in knowing you don't belong here. You don't belong here because you don't. You're meant to leave. You have a life somewhere else. I wish I could take you with me now, but keep going. You will make it out. It wasn't about telling her it was fine or trying to talk her out of her pain. It was just validating her for feeling it, for seeing what she saw, for knowing what she knew. Then I turned to another version of me, the one in the psychiatrist's chair, junior high Bethany, sitting stiff, small in the oversized office chair, while adults talk over her head about what's wrong with her. I walked right into that room, my now self, and I didn't ask for permission to interrupt. I stood between her and the table where a diagnosis had been decided for her. I took her hand and whispered something I wish someone had told me back then. You are not this diagnosis. You are not defective. You are not too much. You are not unfixable. The people around you might not understand you, but that does not mean you are wrong. It means you're different, and different is good. Your frustration, your sadness, the way your spirit refuses to obey to church standards and the way you're told is not proof of brokenness. It's proof of life. Signs of a healthy mind reacting to an unhealthy environment. Hold on. I went back to that little girl, finally, on the Sunday school bench, her feet swinging above the floor, wondering if she'd been switched at birth. I knelt beside her in my mind in EMDR and said, "No, you weren't switched at birth. You're meant to be something called a cycle breaker. You can do this. Just hold on. You will make it through it." It wasn't the kind of comfort that I used to imagine that I would get. No false promises. You'll love it here someday. I just gave hard truth paired with hope. For the first time, I wasn't trying to erase the I don't belong feeling. I was validating it. EMDR gave me the space to do that, to finally step into those moments, not as the powerless child I was, but as the grown woman I am now. And maybe that's one of the most healing parts of it. You can't go back and change what happened, but you can go back and make sure your younger self finally hears the truth. Something about giving my younger self permission to feel what she felt instead of shaming her or trying to fix her. It loosened a knot inside me I didn't even know I'd been carrying. And the pain in my abdomen was easing. My breathing deepened. I wasn't healed in that instant, but the change behind the belief had totally shifted. As we kept moving through the sets, the grief and pain gave way to a quiet strength, a sense of being grounded, even hopeful. My therapist thought it was a good point to bring me out of it, and she asked me to reassess the negative cognition of, I don't belong, something is wrong with me. I can't remember the exact number I gave her, but I do remember the feeling that I still didn't belong, and I was happy about that. Something was definitely not wrong with me for feeling out of place in the world I'd been born into. I was grateful for it. That disconnect wasn't a flaw, it was my compass. And when I was face to face with those three past versions of myself, the little girl on the Sunday school bench, the child grieving at the end of the Minneapolis trip, and the junior high me in the psychiatrist's office, I felt an unexpected swell of pride. Pride in their fierce hearts, their refusal to be lulled into sameness, their unwillingness to be sheep. Even when the world around them demanded obedience, they kept a small, stubborn flame alive, a knowing that they were meant for more. I looked back on those 3 younger selves I had embraced, how they had carried the weight of loneliness, confusion, and misplaced judgment. Yet they did not shatter. They held their ground. They kept the ember of hope alive. And in that moment, I realized nothing was ever wrong with me. I was born a cycle breaker, a fire that would not go out, to survive the brainwashing, to stand unbent when everything around me tried to press me into obedience, was not just survival, it was triumph. I left that first EMDR session carrying something I hadn't touched in years, a quiet, unshakable confidence. It was as if an ancient knot inside me had loosened, one that was woven through decades of shame and silence. I don't belong no longer rang like a curse, but like a bell of freedom. My refusal to fit, my resistance to being reshaped were not flaws. They were proof of my unbreakable spirit. I wish I could say I was instantly healed after that and never needed therapy again. Wouldn't that be nice? But the truth is, I still had a long road ahead, and I still do. I'm still in therapy. Still, I walked out of that room a believer. As skeptical as I'd been going in, I left thinking, I cannot believe how profoundly that just shifted something in me. It was life-altering. It was months later that I heard Maddie Zom's "If It's Not God" for the first time. A beautifully, profoundly honest anthem for anyone who's felt like they didn't belong in the religious spaces they grew up in. It beautifully contrasts the version of God that was taught, often rooted in shame, fear, control, conditional love, with a deeper, more authentic spirit of kindness, acceptance, unconditional love. I would actually like to do a deeper dive of how poignant that song is, how glad I am that she wrote it. But until then, I'll just say that the chorus hits me every time because it acknowledges both the pain of deconstruction and the radical bravery it takes to stay. If it wasn't God calling me to leave that place, I'm so grateful. It was my own fierce, faith-filled heart that did. The lyric goes, if it wasn't God, then thank God it was me. That lyric holds so much weight for me now because it mirrors what happened in that therapy room, in those rounds of sets focusing on I don't belong, something is wrong with me. I discovered the fire inside me wasn't broken, it was unshakable and needed to be validated. If it wasn't God assigning my path out of there, thank God it was my own choices. That's what I felt standing next to anger and grief Bethany in those sets. Yes, I don't belong here, in this church, in this role, in this life, and that's not a defect. It's a compass pointing to the life I was meant to build. My next session, about 2 weeks later, would dive into another deep wound. This time, the belief that other people's opinions and other people's feelings matter far more than my own needs, wants, and desires. But that's a story for next time. Thank you for listening.